What does it take to become the most iconic woman in fashion history, accidentally create the world's most coveted luxury item, and still lose the thing that mattered most? Jane Birkin wasn't just a muse. She was the blueprint for an entire era. She was the woman who turned a wicker basket and a white t-shirt into a global obsession, who made effortless bohemian beauty the defining aesthetic of a generation, and who, during a single chance encounter on a flight from Paris to London, inspired the most expensive handbag ever made. But the woman behind it was not the free-spirited icon the magazines sold. She was a deeply insecure English girl who fell into the wrong life at exactly the right moment and spent the next decade trying to survive it. And the relationship that defined her would cost everyone inside it far more than the world ever knew, starting with the daughter who grew up watching it all.
You feel as if someone's pulled the carpet from under your feet.
Jane poured everything into her family, her image, and her art. But in a world that only valued the surface, the private wreckage went unseen. And when it finally became impossible to ignore, it was already too late. Jane Birkin was born in London in 1946, and by 20 she was already married to the British composer John Barry, a marriage that ended as quickly as it began, leaving her a young single mother with an infant daughter named Kate, and no clear idea what came next. She was deeply insecure, a little lost, trying to figure out who she was outside of a life that had already gone sideways. So she auditioned for a French film called Slogan. She got the part. And on that set, in 1968, she met Serge Gainsbourg, the man who would change the trajectory of her life forever. Serge Gainsbourg was 18 years her senior, a brilliant, provocative, but deeply troubled French musician. Together, they became the ultimate it couple, embodying the free-spirited bohemian lifestyle that would define the 1970s. In photographs, it looked absolutely magical. Jane with her signature wicker basket, messy fringe, and simple white t-shirts, alongside Serge with his eternal cigarette and nonchalant arrogance. Early in their relationship in 1969, they released the explicit track Je t'aime, moi non plus, which was banned in multiple countries and publicly condemned by the Vatican. But it made them instantly world famous. However, the honest reality was far less glamorous. It was a life filled with intrusive paparazzi, wild nights, excessive drinking, and absolute chaos. Behind the iconic black and white photographs that still adorn mood boards today hid a deeply dysfunctional and toxic relationship. Serge struggled with severe alcoholism that made his behavior wildly unpredictable. The relationship was characterized by psychological violence and extreme emotional peaks and valleys. During recording sessions, Serge would regularly scream at her and hit her with a ruler if she didn't sing a note exactly as he had envisioned it. This was the unstable environment in which Jane was trying to raise her children. A house constantly filled with famous guests, the smell of smoke, the presence of alcohol, and unpredictable emotional outbursts. Jane undeniably loved her children deeply, but she was herself still a young woman trying to survive in the all-consuming whirlwind of Serge's genius and destruction. She once said she let her children go off all day the way her parents let her go off. That freedom might sound idyllic in a magazine interview, but for a growing child, it often means a harrowing lack of safety. The myth of Jane Birkin was inadvertently amplified in 1983 during a flight from Paris to London. Jane happened to be seated next to Jean-Louis Dumas, the then CEO of the luxury house Hermès. When the contents of her famous wicker basket spilled from the overhead compartment onto the floor of the plane, she complained to her neighbor that, as a young mother, she couldn't find a suitable, practical leather weekend bag. On a simple airplane sickness bag, she sketched her ideal handbag. A year later, in 1984, the Birkin bag was born. It was a chance encounter that led to the most exclusive and iconic fashion item in history. But while the bag took on an unstoppable life of its own, becoming a symbol of unattainable perfection, the life of the woman behind it slowly began to crumble. By the time Jane found herself on that Paris flight in 1983, her relationship with Serge had already been over for 3 years. But distance from Serge Gainsbourg was never quite the same thing as freedom from him. On March 2nd, 1991, he died of a heart attack at his Paris home, aged 62. Despite everything they had lived through together, the chaos, the violence, the years of emotional turmoil, Jane had never stopped loving him. She spent years defending his genius and his legacy to a world that often preferred to reduce him to a caricature. His death was another fracture in a life that had already accumulated so many. So what is it like to grow up when the fashion world views your mother as an infallible goddess? Jane had 3 daughters with 3 different men: Kate Barry, Charlotte Gainsbourg, and Lou Doyon. While Charlotte and Lou eventually found their way into the spotlight as successful actresses and singers, the story of Kate Barry is profoundly different. Kate was the eldest, the child from Jane's first marriage to John Barry. She witnessed the most chaotic and unstable years of Jane's life from the closest proximity, growing up in a house where the adults were often more out of control than the children. Kate was a quiet, introverted child who preferred to view the world from a distance. Jane later recalled that Kate had a Polaroid camera in her hand from a young age, but that camera wasn't just a childhood hobby. It was perhaps her only way to create distance, to frame the overwhelming, noisy world around her and make it somewhat controllable. When your entire life is public property, the lens of a camera offers a rare place to hide. The fashion world demanded constant perfection, glamour, and a smile for the cameras, but Kate desperately sought peace and anonymity behind the lens. She was exceptionally talented, and her intimate, vulnerable work appeared in prestigious magazines like Vogue and the Sunday Times magazine. She had a unique eye, capturing a quiet beauty that stood in stark contrast to the loud, flashy world her mother inhabited. But the long shadow of her mother's global fame and the deep instability of her childhood took their toll. The bohemian freedom that the magazines praised had left deep scars. Kate struggled with severe drug and alcohol addictions from a young age. She fought a lifelong, exhausting battle against her inner demons, a battle that was largely fought in private, far away from the glamorous parties and runway shows. Her struggle was so profound that it eventually led her to found APTE, a peer support organization for people battling addiction, hoping to save others from the darkness she knew so well. It is a cruel, uncomfortable paradox. While wealthy women around the world paid tens of thousands of dollars to own a piece of the Birkin magic, the real Birkin family fought behind closed doors against the dark reality of addiction, depression, and trauma. The industry celebrated the bohemian lifestyle of Jane and Serge as the ultimate ideal, but structurally ignored the collateral damage this lifestyle inflicted on the people closest to them. Jane herself seemed to understand, at least privately, where the real value of her life lay. When asked by a journalist in 2013 about her greatest achievement, she answered without hesitation. She didn't mention the movies, the hit records, or the handbag that had made her name immortal. She said her greatest achievement was her 3 girls, and, personally, lasting so long in a profession with limited talent. Her daughters were her absolute everything, which makes what came next all the more devastating. There is no need for exaggerated sound effects or embellished drama. The heartbreaking, irreversible facts speak for themselves. The tragedy that had been quietly building for decades finally reached its devastating conclusion on a cold winter day in Paris. On December 11th, 2013, Kate Barry was found on the pavement below her 4th-floor apartment in Paris. She was only 46 years old, and she had been alone that night, as she was most nights. And when investigators entered her flat, the door had been locked from the inside, and antidepressants were found inside. The investigation concluded what the circumstances already made clear. She had fought this battle for most of her life, and on that night in December, she lost it. The fashion world stood still for a moment. Formal condolences were issued, beautifully written articles appeared about the talented photographer who had passed away far too soon. The industry offered what it always offers in these moments: kind words, carefully worded tributes, and a respectful silence that lasted precisely as long as the news cycle allowed. But for Jane Birkin, life definitively stopped at that moment. The woman known worldwide for her radiant smile and effortless style broke completely and irreparably.
You didn't see it coming. I saw it coming on many other occasions, and I'd been able to be there but this time not. So it took my confidence away completely. The confidence is one tiny thing, but she's irreplaceable. Mm-hmm. And the lack of her will be forever.
The loss of her eldest child was a blow she would never recover from. Jane locked herself away in her grief. She withdrew almost entirely from public life, unable to face a world that still wanted her to be the carefree girl from the 1970s. In an act of profound mourning, she cut off her iconic hair and traded her elegant clothing for baggy, shapeless men's clothes. The glamour was definitively gone, replaced by a raw, undisguised pain. The woman who had taught the world how to be effortlessly chic no longer had any desire for beauty or aesthetics. She was reduced to the most pure, painful essence, a grieving mother who had outlived her child. The industry had taken her name and turned it into a symbol of ultimate luxury, but all the wealth and status in the world couldn't bring her daughter back. In the years following Kate's death, Jane was plagued by a series of severe health problems, including a grueling battle against leukemia and a severe stroke. Her body was failing, but the emotional pain always remained the heaviest burden. And while all of that was happening, while Jane was disappearing into her grief, her illness, and her silence, the famous bag kept selling. The Birkin bag had never been more desirable. Every year, the waiting lists grew longer, the prices climbed higher, and the cultural obsession deepened. Celebrities carried them, billionaires collected them. Investment analysts wrote about them with the same language they used for gold and real estate. The brand had never been healthier. But behind all of it, quietly and away from the cameras, Jane Birkin was running out of time. She passed away on July 16, 2023, at 76 years old. She was buried in a private ceremony at the Montparnasse Cemetery in Paris, in the exact same grave as her beloved daughter Kate, the daughter she had never stopped mourning, and the loss she had never really recovered from. The bag outlived her, of course. It always was going to. But what the industry built, with her name, and what she actually got from it, tells you everything you need to know. In 2025, her original prototype sold at Sotheby's for $10.1 million. The most expensive handbag ever sold at auction. But Jane herself received roughly only £30,000 a year in royalties from her mess, and she gave every penny of it away to charity. In 2015, when she discovered that the exotic skin versions of the bag were being made using documented animal cruelty, she called Hermès and asked them to remove her name from the bag entirely, the most famous bag in the world, her own name. She wanted it gone. Hermès corrected the practices and she allowed the name to stay. But that moment tells you more about who Jane Birkin actually was than any photograph ever taken of her. She spent years quietly trying to detach herself from a myth the industry refused to let die. For Kate Barry, there was no detaching. She was born into an era that preached freedom, but forgot that children need safety, and she carried that weight every single day of her life. When she died in December 2013, the fashion world posted its tributes, observed its moment of silence, and moved on to the next season without breaking stride. The sales of the Birkin bag did not drop for a single day. The myth only grew larger. Jane Birkin gave everything she had to an industry that never once asked what it was costing her. She had been battling leukemia since 1998, and after her stroke in 2021, her daughters Charlotte and Lou took turns being by her side so she was never alone. That same year, Charlotte made a documentary about her called Jane by Charlotte, traveling with her, filming her, capturing her before time ran out. Jane learned to walk again. She made plans to get back on stage at the Olympia in Paris. She was still pushing forward, still thinking about the next thing. She never made it, but she was trying, right until the very end. If her story stays with you, let me know in the comments below. Do you think the fashion world has changed? Or are we still watching the same machine run on different names? Thank you for watching. And as always, see you in the next one.